Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Do me a favor and turn to Psalm 121. That is where we will be spending a good portion of our time. And unlike most weeks where I spend a lot of time preaching one psalm, if you've got a chance to look at these, they're all pretty short. And so what we're going to do is pretty much try to do a survey of all 10 or so. And it's really going to be 11 because we're going to back up to Psalm 120. And as we do that, as you're turning to Psalm 121 to start, please consider with me today maybe the title or three things: the Tin Man, the Scarecrow, and the Lion. Right? And so you may recognize those being characters from The Wizard of Oz. And I just, for whatever reason, I can't remember what it was, but I saw something about the maker of The Wizard of Oz. They did a special on him not too long ago. I've put it in my queue, but I haven't watched it. I want to watch it. But it reminded me so much of these Psalms because they're entitled Psalms of Ascents. And so as the children of Israel are going up to Jerusalem, what I started noticing this week is 10 different perspectives on why we're going. And that's why it reminded me of the Tin Man, the Scarecrow, and the Lion, because as they were on the yellow brick road trying to go meet the Wizard of Oz, they each had things on their heart. As a matter of fact, the Tin Man was looking for a heart, but things that they needed emotionally. And we talked about, as we're going in our survey of the last few chapters of the book of Psalms, what we're doing is we're seeing a shift where it's going from Psalms of lament to Psalms of praise and humble expectation. And that's what we're seeing a lot in these Psalms of Ascents. But as apart from, I guess, our characters and friends in The Wizard of Oz, who find out their hope is built on a facade, and behind it is a little man pulling the levers. Israel, when they sing the Psalm of Ascents, one of the things that they realize is they are, no matter how hopeless it seemed, they're going to either seek out, say thanks to, or in a lot of ways just give wisdom to encourage those who are on their way to see the God who really does answer prayers. And so that's why these Psalms of Ascent seem to be so encouraging in so many ways. And as we said, we're going to see, I think, three perspectives. Those who are seeking, kind of like we said with Psalm 119, the relationship between mind, heart, and body. Well, did I say mind? Yeah. Soul, heart. Anyway, you all got it. Mind, body, and soul. We're going to see a lot of that because we're going to see some seekers. And just like we said last week, we have our family members from, or community members from Narcotics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous that meet here regularly. In a lot of ways, it also seemed to be kind of a metaphor for recovery, because we seem to have some people in these Psalms who are on their first legs of recovery, and they're just hoping to get some relief from the things they've been struggling from. But we see some people who seem like they've been to Jerusalem a few times, and they've seen some recovery, and they're encouraging, don't give up, you're going to the right place. And then we're seeing that seasoned wisdom from some others. And we'll start to see it. Okay, so if we look at these as people, what kinds of things will we see? Psalm 121, why are you going up to Jerusalem? I just need some shade from the heat. And we can relate to that, I think, at this time of year. Psalm 121, verse 1, I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where does my help come? My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. He will not let your foot be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber. Behold, he who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade on your right hand. The sun shall not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all evil. He will keep your life. The Lord will keep your going out and your coming in from this time forth and forevermore. First of all, please notice verse 4. The Lord who keeps Israel, he neither sleeps nor slumbers. And understand those times when sometimes we can look for friendship, but we know we have a good friend, but our friends get tired. When Jesus was asking for prayers in the garden, his friends got tired. It wasn't because they hated him. It's because they were just tired from the journey. But what he's saying is you're going to a place where God never sleeps. If things are happening to you that seem difficult, they have a purpose. It's not because God slept on needing to have your back. It's just because there's a purpose behind that suffering. But you are trusting in the most trustworthy. And that's why when you go to Jerusalem, there is no higher mountain. There may be higher mountains in terms of Everest and other peaks that you might climb physically, but there's no higher ruler on any mountain than the one you're going to. So stay encouraged as you go because you're going to find shade there. And when it said shade, the first thing that came to mind for me was throwing shade. And I was like, no, that's what they're looking for relief from. Because if you haven't heard the term throwing shade is kind of one of those kind of subtle ways of making a dig. And he's like, no, this is a place where you get freedom from all that, right? The heat of animosity doesn't beat down here because the one who neither sleeps nor slumbers is providing you protection from whatever is going on around you. So keep moving because you are going to the right place. But understand, when we get there, we have to be able to appreciate God's shade. Why? Because for whatever reason, it reminded me of Jonah. And when Jonah was toward the end of his mission, after he had made his prophecy to Nineveh, and he knew he did not want them saved, but they were going to repent and God was going to give them a break, he sat down in the beating heat and God blessed him with a plant to come up and provide him shade. And the good thing about Jonah was he was able to appreciate it. He was able to appreciate it. But understand how we have to be able to appreciate the shade. Because sometimes God can provide us a place of shade. And if we're not careful, we will misinterpret it and just be like, I can't appreciate the shade because none of us still getting a... Right? So that's the tough part, is appreciating the parameters of God's rest. Because sometimes even when he provides it, I can miss it if I still can't get in line with his will for Nineveh. And that was the lesson in the plant. Why? Because the plant didn't last long. By the next day, it was already starting to wither, and he was even worse off than he was before. But he's like, look, I'm not just being mean, Jonah. There's a lesson in the death of a plant. If you care that much for a plant that you took no care of, right? You didn't have to create it. You didn't nurture it. You didn't do anything for it. And you care. How much do you think I care about Nineveh? No matter how wicked they might seem. So understand empathy from God's perspective. That's so much of a challenge for us right now. Why? Because we're always going, like we said, when we go out from a place of Psalm 119 last week, when we're looking at the words of a wise man who looks at God's word, and we go back out to a world, we're going out to a world that doesn't care anything about the word. So it grabs for our attention every time we turn a channel or click, and we're being lured back into places where even in God's shade, we can still be unhappy. Back up to Psalm 120. Psalm 120, back at verses 5 through 7. Woe to me that I sojourn in Meshech, that I dwell amongst the tents of Kedar. Too long have I had my dwelling place amongst those who hate peace. Verse 7, I am for peace, but when I speak, they are for war. My hometown did not represent itself well last night because there were fights in Houston, legal fights. But there was a young Frenchman who came, very talented young man, to fight a hometown hero. He was a nice guy. Sometimes folks come into town and they're like, I don't like this place. I'm not giving it to your hometown. No, he was nice. And the nicer he was, the more they hated him. He wore the shirt of a fallen hometown hero. They're like, you're making fun of us. No, he's trying to be nice. But sometimes that's the value really of understanding the shade of guys. Because there was, try to keep David to a minimum. But there was a time when David, once he had peace, he extended an olive branch to some folks who were in a time of mourning. They're like, David doesn't like you. He's here to make fun of you. It's like, no, David really is trying to make peace. And so that led to war. And so last night, our hometown hero got whooped real bad. And the way we treated that guy from France made it even worse. Because he was still nice after the fight. He's like, bye. Right? Appreciate the shade. If we can get our mindset in the mindset of God. It's one of the reasons why we say so much studying is not just for memory verses. It's so that we can understand the peace that God has given us and appreciate it while it's there. Why? Because if we don't appreciate the shade, we don't know how long it'll last. And in Jonah's case, God pulled it and left Jonah to consider the lesson. And so we say it all the time. I always want to hold on to God's periods of peace when they are there. But I often forget that he has a timeline that's sometimes different from my own. And the beautiful part about the story in Jonah is I'm convinced that Jonah is given to us for a memory because he was able to understand the lesson and appreciate what God was trying to show him during that portion of shade. And so I think if we saw Psalm 122 talking to Psalm 121, he'd probably be saying, or they'd probably be saying, appreciate the shade once you get there because we're all going to have to go back out to that world. Re-energized on the strength of the shade that we get while we're fortunate enough to be in Jerusalem. In Psalm 122, why are you going up to Jerusalem? Well, it's because I know if I can't get peace anywhere else, I can get peace and I can get fair treatment in Jerusalem. Verse 1, Psalm 21. I was glad when they said to me, let us go to the house of the Lord. Our feet have been standing within our gates, within your gates, O Jerusalem. Jerusalem, built as a city that is bound firmly together, to which the tribes go up. The tribes of the Lord, as was decreed for Israel, to give thanks to the name of the Lord. The thrones for judgment were set, the thrones of the house of David. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May they be secure who love you. Peace be within your walls and security within your towers. For my brothers and companions' sake, I will say, peace be within you. For the sake of the house of the Lord our God, I will seek your good. And he's talking about peace over and over. Of course, that is something that we can definitely appreciate, because in any time, in any era, I don't think we have to wonder why it is that people would long for a place of peace. But understand the other thing that he mentions along with peace is that whole concept of justice. And why does it keep coming up over and over in David's writing? And I started thinking, I was like, why do I keep failing at really getting it, why this keeps mattering to David? And I think it's because of this. Just like we talked about last week with fasting. When a hungry man sees a refrigerator after a long period of starving, it's going to look a whole lot different than me when I'm just trying to pick what I'm going to eat today, right? A thirsty man, if you're out in the desert and somebody brings you just a jug of even lukewarm water, that's going to taste real good compared to, right? If I got the freezer every day, well, what flavor of tea would I like to take in, right? And so when we're looking at David, understand, it's not just David. There was a man I remember by the name of Jephthah who spent his early years as an outcast because, till a family start, his family actually gave him the boot. But then when war came, the thing about Jephthah is, much like our friend last night, who had to know how to organize himself, his thoughts, and his skills to be able to fight on enemy turf, Jephthah spent all his early years learning how to play away games. So then when it came time to war, when they needed somebody who knew how to fight, it was the kid who always knew how to play away games. And we said it before, the season is about to start. We would throw up a protest if WSU ended up with a schedule with nothing but away games, because that's not considered fair. But understand, there are some people who grow up in a life where you're playing nothing but away games. And when Psalm 122 says, I'm going to Jerusalem, he says, I'm no longer having to play an away game in Jerusalem. It's going to be fair there. And so when I said, why am I failing to get it across? Because you're not really appreciating it from Jephthah's perspective or David's perspective, or like we even talked about before, Joseph's perspective, where even when he did right, he was getting boos. That's what happens on away games. You have to learn how to deal with the fact that you're going to get boos because you're doing the right thing. And it's because they just want you to lose. They want their hometown team to win. And so when you're having a life that's filled with away moments, understand, we talked about it before, the strength that it's building for you to go to a place where it says there are some who are first who will be last, and some who are last who will be first. Why? Sometimes it's just practical. Sometimes just playing that many away games gets you ready to enjoy Jerusalem in a way nobody else really can, right? Because the flip side is if we play too many home games, going to Jerusalem is going to seem like a loss. Why? Because we're used to the crowd cheering no matter what, right? And so if we get used to a crowd that's cheering whether we do right or wrong, it just wants us to win, and we have to go to a place where it is really fair. It's like, oh, hey, do I really want to go? And that's why Romans says, consider yourselves or think of ourselves with sober judgment. Mike D'Antoni, a basketball coach, very successful, never won a championship, but I'm pretty sure this quote goes to him. He talked about, look, never get too high off of your press clippings and never get too low off of your criticism. Why? Because the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. And if you're not properly filtering, then you will have a hard time having a sober assessment. And there's danger in both having too low a sense of self-esteem and too high a sense of self-esteem. Too low a sense of self-esteem can cripple our potential to do all the things that God has destined for us to do. Too high a sense of self-esteem can set us up for nothing but disappointment when we get to a place where it's just fair. Sometimes we have a ship and it's anchored. If you're trying to sail a ship that's anchored, it's not going to sail so good, maybe. Right? But once you pull that anchor, if you've had the right sense of understanding, if you didn't know you were anchored and you're like, man, why am I moving so slow when everybody else is moving so fast? And somebody finally lets you know that you've been dragging your anchor, you'll be like, oh, wait a minute. Now I can go. That's Jerusalem to these people, right? The anchor's been cut and they finally realize, well, there's some things I might not have been doing right, but I think that anchor might have had to do a lot with why I was moving so slow. And so when Psalm 122 is followed up by Psalm 123, it's like, that's really deep, Psalm 122, because I can really appreciate that because I am seeking a refuge of my own because I finally realized how important it was to focus on God, but I was shocked at the response I got. Verse 1, Psalm 123. To you I lift up my eyes, O you who are enthroned in the heavens. Behold, as the eyes of servants look to the hand of their master, as the eyes of a maidservant to the hands of her mistress, so our eyes look to the Lord our God till he has mercy upon us. Have mercy on us, Lord. Have mercy upon us, for we have had more than enough of contempt. Our soul has had more than enough of the scorn of those who are at ease, of the contempt of the proud. And what he's talking about, it seems, is somebody who's, like we talked about before, the relationship between heart and mind and body is that a body can be a leading indicator and a lagging indicator of what's on the heart. These folks that we see have their eyes fixed toward Jerusalem, and thus their walk is headed that way. And as they've made what it seems to be in these early verses, a lifestyle that has their eyes fixed on God as their answer, they're shocked at the response they get. In verse 4, our soul has had enough of the scorn of those who are at ease. And we talked about it in the workplace before, right? When you make a decision, whether you were working just kind of hard enough before or really extremely hard before, it can bring, or your success can bring a mix of responses. Sometimes when the boss appreciates it, right, it brings a lot of praise. But praise from the boss can bring backlash from those who are at ease. And that's what they're experiencing here, right? It's the old Cain dilemma. Cain was flatly told, look, if you do well, will you not be blessed as well? But the answer from Cain was, And so ultimately, Cain wanted the line to move to him instead of having to move to the line. And that's what we're talking about right here. We talked about it before. There are times when, whether it's the workplace or the church, if we start setting a standard, we have to be prepared for the response. Why? Because we talked about it before. A lot of these folks are going up to Jerusalem for mercy because that's what he's praying for, specifically in this dilemma where he's now turned his life around and he's now dealing with the backlash. Understand, there may have been a time when other people got the message that I really need to start chasing God with more diligence earlier on. And his response might be a lot like the people who are now persecuting him. And so now he realizes, oh, wait a minute, this is what it was like. Lord, please give me mercy. I can't condemn them because I was them. Wow. And so he's getting encouragement maybe from the fact that not only has he started to see the benefits of seeking God, but he can now appreciate how harsh it was for him to possibly not be as understanding as he could have been before to other people who found that epiphany before even he did. Psalm 124 might look to him and say, don't be discouraged, don't be discouraged. Because I'm going to say thanks to God because he's delivered me from much the same thing. Psalm 124, verse 1. If it had not been from the Lord, for the Lord who was on our side, let all Israel say now, if it had not been the Lord who was on our side, when people rose up against us, then they would have swallowed us up alive. When their anger was kindled against us, then the flood would have swept us away. The torrent would have gone over us. Then over us would have gone the raging waters. Blessed be the Lord who has not given us as prey to their teeth. We have escaped like a bird from the snare of the fowlers. The snare is broken, and we have escaped. Our help is in the name of the Lord, who made heaven and earth. Look at the list of trials he lists in verses 3 through 5. And over again, it seems to be referencing water. But if you remember at the time that we took a look at the Revelation and what it talks about in terms of Babylon being a woman who's seated on a beast that's riding on waters, the angel who's giving the interpretation to John specifically says the waters are people groups, or the peoples on which the beast is going to build its ministry. And so if we look at that just consistently, just because of the fact that he's talking about, look, we were literally surrounded by enemies, and then he starts talking about water, it may be the water is a metaphor that's used in the same way that it's used in the Revelation. He's talking about, if you just look at Israel's history, how were they taken over? They were taken into captivity by large people groups that brought them into various parts of the world to basically do servant labor, right? And so that is in a lot of ways consistent historically with what we see here in the Psalms and what we see also in at least two different parts of the Revelation, because he uses it also in Revelation 12. And so it looks like the metaphor for the degree of trouble that they're in is like a flood that's sweeping over me when no matter how strong I can swim, it's just too much water. It's too strong and I'm drowning. But thanks be to God. That's why you don't get discouraged, Psalm 123, even if part of it does have to do with your mistakes, because God is still willing to forgive. And that's why I'm going to Jerusalem to say thanks for the ways that he's forgiven me and pulled me out of those deep waters that were about to drown me. Psalm 125. What do you think? Well, Psalm 125 says, I think what you said is right, because those who trust in the Lord are going to see benefits they might not even understand on the way up to Jerusalem. Psalm 125, verse 1. Those who trust in the Lord are like Mount Zion, which cannot be moved, but abides forever. As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people from this time forth and forevermore. For the scepter of wickedness shall not rest on the land allotted to the righteous, lest the righteous stretch out their hands to do wrong. Do good, O Lord, to those who are good, and to those who are upright in their hearts. But those who turn aside to the crooked ways, the Lord will lead away with evildoers. Peace be upon Israel. Understand how that very last verse is another reference to the Revelation when in Revelation 18, the angel, one of the angels who goes out toward the end of time says, come out of her, my people, come out of her, referring to Babylon, the woman seated on the beast. Why? Because God is about to bring judgment on that mighty city that seems so invulnerable. And God is not a respecter of persons. So if you are caught up in the acts of Babylon, you are going to suffer the plagues of Babylon. God does not want you there. So before the plagues hit, today, once we talked about before, Hebrews 3 and 4, today is the day of salvation because God is fair. And so even if we as his people are caught up in the acts of the wicked city, or just like here, when they didn't necessarily even know of a revelation prophecy, he's saying God has a character trait that carries forth between the Genesis and the revelation of these scriptures, because he is eternal. And it says he doesn't change. And there are some things in terms of his mercy that allows him to change the punishment that he will avert if we repent, but his fundamental character for love and truth and justice, they are eternal. And so when he says a righteous man who gets caught up in the acts of the wicked is in a dangerous place, then we can believe, because we see it so many times in scripture. That's what he's saying here. He says, oh, don't focus on that. Focus on the fact that in verse 1, if you trust in the Lord, he is a place of refuge where you can't be moved. And what did that make me think of this week? Cybersecurity. Why? Because cybersecurity, it seems like, okay, we got hackers that the government hires to make sure the other hackers can't get in our stuff. But I listened to a guy who just got out of prison. There was a Russian guy who just got out of prison not too long ago. He did an interview on one of the YouTube channels I watched. He was like, here's the thing, bud. You kind of want to worry, but you don't, because Russia probably already has your social security number, and right? And the only thing that's stopping them from getting to you is you haven't come across their desk yet, because the volume of information they have is so great that they can't hack it all at once. And so understand, when we're looking at this place, God surrounds his people like the mountains surround Jerusalem. Every now and again, when you see those big banks, they have to be like, okay, yeah, we got great cybersecurity. We trust it a lot. But we regret to inform you that your personal information is now public, right? And so these banks that have huge resources, governments who have huge resources, they're battling back and forth for our private information, which is only so private, and we don't really know how private. But like the mountains surround Jerusalem, you aren't going to hack Jerusalem. If you're getting into Jerusalem, it's because God said, look, Jerusalem is no longer living up to the standards that I set for it. That's the only thing that allows any enemy to penetrate Jerusalem's defenses, right? When even our best security, our most technologically advanced, richest resources can't necessarily stop cyber crime, right? And we're also heavily invested in the internet. You can't pay your bills anymore unless you are, and we can't really opt out anymore. So we're almost all bound to put our personal information in places that are vulnerable no matter how secure they seem, right? And so that's what this guy is saying. He's like, look, I'm going to a place where I know my information and my person are secure. And as much criticism as we may take by saying we believe in God, you just ask the pagans how secure their information is next time they want to laugh at you for going to church. Because it's not all that secure, right? All right, so Psalm 126 might look back and say, you're absolutely right. Psalm 125. But even if you have been in one of those circumstances where you find that you've lost everything, either because it was not secure enough for thieves or just bad decisions, God is more than capable of restoring the things that we lost if they listen to you and understand that you have to trust in him and you have to walk in his ways. Psalm 126, verse 1. When the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, we were like those who dream. Then our mouth was filled with laughter and our tongue with shouts of joy. Then they said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. The Lord has done great things for us. We are glad. Restore our fortunes, O Lord, like the strings of the Negev. Those who sow in tears shall reap with shouts of joy. He who goes out weeping, bearing seed for the sowing, shall come home with shouts of joy, bringing his sheaves with him, whether or not it is by mistake or simply by theft. God can restore it. The same God who can protect it can restore it, regardless of the source, of the reason, of the cause of the loss. And why is that so important? It's because sometimes I click on those channels where we as believers debate non-believers, and we seem to feel the need to justify the miracles as being somehow logical. Look, either you believe in a God who can do or you don't. And once you believe in a God that has the power to protect with the level of security that we've seen in some of these Psalms, and to actually even create the world, most of the miracles we're debating are less impressive than the ones that he started the very foundations of the world with. So either you believe or you don't. The debate beyond that is kind of trivial, right? And so that's what he's saying here in many ways. If you believe that the God who created everything really created everything, then believe he can create restoration no matter how much you've lost, because you haven't lost the whole world, and he's already made that. And so we're going to hang our hope on anything. It's not necessarily whether he is able to restore our fortunes. A lot of it has to do with, as Jesus challenged one man who he helped, do you believe? And that's the challenge for us. Do we really believe that he's willing to do it? It can be so hard to do. But one of the things we don't have to doubt on our trek up to Jerusalem is we are going to the place where he definitely can. We just have to find out whether or not it is in his will. Psalm 127 says that's exactly right. Exactly right. Why? Because I spent so much time trying to build it on my own, not realizing there's a key piece of wisdom I was missing out on in verse 1. Unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. It is vain that you rise up early and go late to rest, eating the bread of anxious toil, for he gives his beloved sleep. Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord. The fruit of the womb, a reward, like arrows in the hand of a warrior, are the children of one's youth. Blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them. He shall not be put to shame when he speaks to his enemies at the gate. Understand that all derives from a house built by God. And here's the thing, is we have a young lady who is going out to make her college decision. This is a time in life where we were asked, what's your 5-year plan? What are your ambitions? And the world is having us basically consider some healthy advice. Think ahead. But one of the things that we have to make sure we include in that equation is, what would God have me do with these few years? Why? Because these folks are in various stages of learning. Man, I lost it all because I never really realized, now that I'm finally starting to focus on what God said, that none of this had anything to do with what he had planned for me, right? And so now I'm in restoration mode or recovery mode because I didn't put him in on the planning stage. And so now I'm so glad you said that, because now I can talk to this generation and let them know that no matter what you're doing now, the planning stage is really important. Why? Because I can talk from experience. I have friends. We all went to school to do the same thing. Half of us aren't doing that anymore, right? Because life is hard to estimate, to guesstimate, to plan out, right? And even if you plan it out perfectly, oh man, you can get an A on your 5-year planning test, if they even do that in career mode anymore. But even your guidance counselor can't guarantee that circumstances are going to fit your plan. And so why not? If we really believe that we are serving a God who actually created everything, why not consult the God who is telling us which things should be a priority in our plans, so that we can understand which things matter. And when, like it says, once again, I'm going to shake the earth. And like when the earth shakes, it's kind of like these fires. It quakes and things that aren't stable tumble. He shakes it so he can show what's stable and what ain't. And so the things that tend to stand are the things that he's promised would be eternal. And it's much like that young man came into Houston last night. He came into Houston in a good spirit. You don't like me, but I still love you, right? And he didn't have to get mad because he knew he could fight, right? So he had the skills. He had the God-given talents. Why get mad? I understand why they're mad. Deep down inside, they know their guy's about to lose. So I can still be nice, because those are the kinds of things that last. And so when you're making your plan, understand what's important. Love is just one of those examples. Kindness is one of those examples. But those are the things that can help us have plans that endure. Also, that unless the Lord watches over the city, it goes back to that thing we talked about in the previous psalm. where God's security, like the mountains surround Jerusalem, it's secure. But understand how even one of Israel's greatest warriors, David, back in Psalm 44, we didn't preach that one, but he says, I do not trust in my bow. It is not my sword that delivers me. But even as your great military leader, I understand if God didn't drop the battle plan, we don't go. And over again, you see that in his military strategy. He has the priest close by. What does God say? And so he has no shame in saying, okay, yeah, I'm your military leader. I killed Goliath, but guess what? I didn't go out without hearing from God. And every battle I fought ever since has been fought on that same principle. So once again, when the people call you, you should really do something different than going to church, right? Does that really make sense? Let them know that, and I remember, I can't even think of the example right now, but there was a time about 2 or 3 years ago where everybody was questioning, well, yeah, that's right. No matter what you think about the election, no matter who you were voting for, we got this thing for the last 20 or so years where the popular vote has been different than the electoral college, and the person who's gotten elected has been different from who everybody expected. Well, when we were in school, they're saying, well, that never happens, or it's only happened once in America's history, and it's probably not going to happen very much anymore. Well, all those folks who say that we are foolish for going to church had to completely reevaluate the way that they thought the whole political process worked for 200 plus years. And no matter who you voted for, you have to do the math differently now. Why? Because all those geniuses that tell you we're not so bright for going to church, they, turns out, didn't really necessarily know how we even really elect our president. And so every time someone tries to make you feel foolish for believing in God, don't forget all the different times that all those certainties that they had out in either the scientific community or the analytical community just kind of fell along the wayside, right? And so you can wonder, okay, well, if you all know so much, why are we having to change so many of your, what is it they say, lead pipe sense assumptions, right? Why are so many of those lead pipe senses just not guaranteed? And so I respect your decision to go another way, but for whatever reason, every time I really trust God and I do the math, for whatever reason, it seems to work out, even if it doesn't seem like it outwardly. And with that, Psalm 128 probably says, you know what, you're exactly right. Keep encouraging them. Psalm 127, because not only does the Lord need to build the house, inside the house, it needs to be filled with people who fear the Lord and walk in his ways. Verse 1, blessed is everyone who fears the Lord, who walks in his ways. You shall eat the fruit of the labor of your hands. You shall be blessed, and it shall be well with you. Your wife will be like a fruitful vine within your house. Your children will be like olive shoots around your table. Behold, thus shall the man be blessed who fears the Lord. The Lord bless you from Zion. May you see the prosperity of Jerusalem all the days of your life. May you see your children's children. Peace be upon Israel. And when he says, may you see the prosperity of Jerusalem all the days of your life, he's talking about a nation, not just you and your family, but may righteousness spread so far throughout Jerusalem that its peace is as secure as what God has promised. Because to understand, the collective condition of the nation was promised to be prosperity by God if they walked in his ways. And so one of the advantages of not just me and my family, Joshua style, saying we will serve the Lord, but having it be kind of like, as opposed to a cancer that spreads throughout the body, as opposed to a pandemic that spreads around and makes us all kind of second guess life in general, let kindness and righteousness spread throughout the land so we can at least test God in things he said, test me on. And if he said righteousness equates to peace, let's maybe at least try. And so ultimately what he's saying is, if you see the prosperity of Jerusalem, understand that's a red flag for a righteousness that we have all agreed to embrace, not only within our families, but as our families relate to other families. And hopefully the love that we share, and just like the French guy came into town this week, hopefully after the pain of the loss leaves, there are at least a few people who will remember, you know what, I didn't like that guy, but I really didn't have a reason to hate him. So as I reflect, and as I'm no longer angry about him forcing our whole city to hold this L, I can really think that next time I go to work and people are treating me unfairly, if I can just win, I don't have to be angry at them. Because that big guy with the knockout power just did his job and was nice in the process. And maybe, sometimes sports, when it's at its best, can help set an example for how we engage with people around us and help to change the entire temperature of a work environment and, God willing, a city. And so seeing examples like that, that's one of the reasons why sometimes I like to pick sports heroes. They're just kind of good guys. And so even though we can't necessarily know who's who, we don't know if that guy's got genuine character. But if there's a good thing, like Paul said, imitate me as I imitate Christ, I think it might be okay to imitate every godly person as they set an example for ways that I can improve or level up my relationships with those around me. But with that, Psalm 129, as we begin to approach a close. Now they're going to talk about the collective history of their nation. Even though we're all coming to Jerusalem at this point for different purposes, we all share a common history, and this is it. Greatly have they afflicted me from my youth. Let Israel now say, greatly have they afflicted me from my youth, yet they have not prevailed against me. The plowers plowed upon my back. They made long their furrows. The Lord is righteous. He has cut the cords of the wicked. May all who hate Zion be put to shame and turn backwards. Let them be like the grass on the housetops, which withers before it grows up, with which the reaper does not fill his hand, nor the binder of sheaves his arms. Nor do those who pass by say, the blessing of the Lord be upon you. We bless you in the name of the Lord. Understand, these people have a history of suffering, and for whatever reason, eventually this psalm took my mind back to Psalm 53, I think it is. No, it's not Psalm 53. It's Isaiah 50, where he says, I did not hide my cheeks from those who pull out the beard, and I did not turn my back away from those who smite, right? And so in some ways, just like Titus was telling us this morning, one of the reasons why we have to say thanks is that imagery of a young man who saved a kid who was basically about to end it all, from the despair that comes from not being able to see the hope that exists on the other end. That comes at a cost, right? Sometimes the intervention comes with losing friends of your own. And this is a psalm that says the intervention, at least so far as it relates to Christ, came at the expense of a back that was grooved like a man would plow a field. And so I can think of all kinds of images I've seen from different people groups who endured the kinds of beatings that it seems like it may be describing here. I can't say that this is a messianic psalm. I didn't see those kinds of references. But I do know that when you look at the description of the things that the Christ suffered, it is very similar to the kinds of torture he refused to turn away from. And so understand, one of the reasons why when we're going up to Jerusalem, some of us who have more experience in making this journey, who are going to say thanks to God for all he's given us. Sometimes when we've been given that great a blessing, that great a level of forgiveness, we have to embrace the possibility that we will have to intervene for others at great cost to ourselves. Why? Because Paul said, look, if we have been gifted with so great a salvation, what kind of people should we be, right? And so that's one of the reasons why when we are going up to Jerusalem, or this group of travelers is going up to Jerusalem, they're not only going up to, some say thanks, some to seek refuge, others to simply give wisdom to those who are traveling. It is the same kind of thing that we saw. The very word for witness in the New Testament means, literally looks like our word for martyr, which means someone who's not simply willing to tell the truth. They're willing to speak it at the expense of their own lives. And so that's the maturity of thanks. As we see some of these more seasoned veterans, of course, I'm personifying Psalms, but what seems to be Psalms that are written from the perspective of these more seasoned veterans, these are individuals who are able to encourage, but also balance our expectations of what salvation actually looks like. It is, if we are saying thanks to a sacrificial God, we are going to be a sacrificial people. And finally, in Psalm 130, out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord. O Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to the voice of my pleas for mercy. If you, O Lord, should mark iniquities, O Lord, who could stand? But with you there is forgiveness, that you may be feared. I wait for the Lord. My soul waits, and in his word I hope. My soul waits for the Lord more than watchmen for the morning, more than watchmen for the morning. O Israel, hope in the Lord. For with the Lord there is steadfast love, and with him is plentiful redemption. and he will redeem Israel from all his iniquities. Understand the depth of that promise. We talked about the difference between sin, transgression, and iniquity. Iniquity is that level of wrongdoing that basically looks more like wickedness or straight rebellion. And so ultimately they're ending this series of Psalms by saying he's not just willing to forgive your sins, your oopses when you're trying to do the wrong thing. He's willing to forgive those periods of our life when we've been just flat out rebellious, whether it's by delusion or whether it's just by, I couldn't care less. Things are going pretty well, so I'm going to do things my way. He's willing to forgive that, right? And so that's what they're saying. Give us mercy for even the deepest transgressions, the deepest wrongs, the deepest iniquities that we've committed. Why? Just so we can go back and do them again? No, because that throws God up into open shame. And more importantly, like it's quoted in Jesus' ministry. Look, the name of God is blasphemed among the heathens all day because of you. No, if you've been given that kind of second chance, as I often try to conclude, the question for us always is, what kind of people should we be? Just like Jesus was willing to give the level of sacrifice that looks like, at least this set of Psalms describes another plowing of his flesh that was given for our second chance. God willing, we don't have to suffer to that degree because, as Titus has said, he's already done that sacrifice. We can't impress God with our willingness to go through pain, but we can look with an open eye to the needs of those who also need a second chance and try to be the kind of person who can empathize with them because we know what it's like to be forgiven. And with that, God willing, no matter where you are in your life right now, hopefully spiritually at least, Jerusalem, or the thought of Jerusalem, or the prayers of these saints, gives you some sort of hope that you have a fit and some sort of refuge in Jerusalem if you simply keep your faith and your walk in God.